Hey, what's up guys, it's Nicktoon. Today I'm going to be showing you guys the updated best Anomaly Power Pyromancer build that even after the patch is still one of the strongest builds in the entire game, easily killing the final Arbiter in just 6 eruptions at Apocalypse Tier 37. A ton of stuff got nerfed and changed with the most recent update that just went live, and unfortunately Pyromancer kind of took the biggest hit from these changes, but as you can see, if you set it up right, it's still incredibly strong. It's just not nearly as broken as it used to be. I plan to make some updated videos for all of the characters, so please let me know in the comments which build you guys would like to see next. And if you like the video or you find it helpful, I'd greatly appreciate you guys dropping a sub. I'm really close to 150k subs, so every little bit helps. Anyways, there's not all that much to say about the build. It's kind of just still really strong regardless, but let's just get into it. Before we jump into things, I want to give a huge thanks to today's sponsor for helping support me so I can continue to create content for a living. And that sponsor is Surfshark. If you're worried about others accessing your personal information or being able to see what you do online, you definitely need to try out Surfshark VPN. Surfshark is a virtual private network that makes all of your internet travel through an encrypted tunnel. This gives you the ability to protect your online privacy, control your personal data, access content safely, hiding your IP address and all online activity, all the while accessing a ton of additional benefits. My favorite thing about Surfshark VPN is that on top of all of these things, with it you can actually get notified if your personal information has been leaked somewhere online, and it will even tell you when you should change your information to prevent account breaches, which I find incredibly helpful, and it's kind of crazy that it can do that. But honestly, the main reason that I personally would get a VPN outside of browsing the internet safely is the ability to access certain content, even games, that isn't available in your country. So for example, if I wanted to watch Fantastic Beasts on Netflix, it's just not available for me. But if I just open Surfshark real quick, change my location to India, now I'm actually able to watch it. Surfshark has over 3,200 servers in 95 plus countries, so you can access all kinds of extra content that you otherwise wouldn't be able to, such as games that are actually only available in Korea, like how Lost Ark used to be. Another great thing about it is that it's extremely easy to use and is very lightweight. With so many amazing features and reasons to protect your information growing every single day, getting Surfshark is an absolute no-brainer. Especially because if you use my coupon code NICK2 by clicking on the link in the description or scanning the QR code on screen, you'll get 83% off your first purchase with an extra 3 months for free. And if for whatever reason you don't love Surfshark, there's a 30-day money-back guarantee. So make sure to check the link in the description, and a huge thanks to Surfshark for sponsoring this video. All right, let's just get into the skills. Real quick, I imagine some of you guys are wondering why Eruption Pyromancer is still going to be the best version of Pyromancer out of all the Anomaly Power builds that you can make for Pyro. The reason being is Eruption by default just has so much damage. If you just slap on Lava Lich and slap on Eruption mods, the amount of damage that you can get with Eruption when it comes to boss killing is literally second to none. And even with a lot of the changes that particularly target using Eruption for boss killing, Eruption still is the strongest option. There's a ton of other things that exist, like Phaser Beam, you could do a full Feed the Flames build, Thermal Bomb, Heat Seeker, etc. Tried pretty much every variation of this that I used to use, but ultimately those builds weren't nearly as strong as Eruption when it comes to just pure damage, and also Phaser Beam got pretty significantly nerfed because we actually get the status power penalty from having a higher Apocalypse Tier that we didn't used to have because it was bugged, so that indirectly, or I guess directly, affects Phaser Beam very negatively because Phaser Beam scales off of our status power. TLDR, Eruption is the best because it just scales up really high, and nothing else is really able to scale as much, which is kind of unfortunate, but that's kind of just how it is. So obviously going to be using Eruption paired with a whole bunch of mods is going to enable Eruption to just pretty much one-shot everything and kill bosses incredibly fast. Then we have Ash Blast and Overheat. Ash Blast is mainly to pair with the Death Sentence mod, so we get some really good extra damage, and it also counts as an Immobilize skill, so in our class tree we can get the extra Anomaly power from using an Immobilize skill. Good old combo of Ash Blast, Overheat, just to one-shot clear entire maps. Overheat doesn't really help us very much when it comes to bossing, so if you really wanted to, you could use like Phaser Beam for boss killing, I guess, but honestly nothing really does all that much damage. I guess you could also use like Thermal Bomb so that you could apply Branded when bossing if you really wanted to sweat out the boss killing, but ultimately without Ash Blast plus Overheat, your ad clear will be pretty slow. Just wanted to mention that Overheat doesn't really have any benefit when it comes to bossing, but it's still worth using anyway just because easier to have an all-around versatile setup, right? When it comes to the skill tree, not really all that much that you want to swap around here. If you want more boss damage, you could swap one World Ablaze cooldown reduction to a Mark's Cumulation. And if you're ad clearing and you feel like your cooldowns are too long, then you could actually put on World Ablaze. Something that got changed recently is Wildfire and Conduction in the pack tree, which I'll show you guys later, actually extends beyond the global cooldown reduction cap. So the cooldown reduction cap is 55%, and previously if you were to just get Wildfire, this would not put it up to 65%. It would in your skill sheet, but your cooldowns wouldn't actually be reduced by a further 10%. This now actually works, however, it's not really worth it in my opinion because getting extra damage is really nice. However, if you just wanted to be able to spam your skills more often when it comes to mobbing, or you're playing with friends or something and your overheats aren't able to one-shot anyway, you could take 2 points out of Conflagration and Trial of the Ashes and then put it into Wildfire. Additionally, you could also take 1 point out of Trial of the Ashes or Conflagration and go into something that gives you some survivability, such as Chasing the Chill Away or Phoenix Nestling for a cheat death. Another mod that you have the option of swapping out is Trial of the Ashes. So this is particularly good when it comes to mobbing because it's going to help enable our overheats to one-shot enemies because they're going to be afflicted with Ash. But on bosses, for example, Ash isn't going to last all that long because we're pretty much going to consume it really quickly with our overheat anyway, so we're not really getting all that much value out of that, so you could just swap this into Blood Boil if you wanted some more boss damage. When it comes to the pack tree, this is where the build got significantly nerfed and one of the main changes. So Melting Point remains the same. You get increased resistance piercing when you are above 80% health and when you are below 40% health. Pretty nice because the resistance piercing is good, especially when you take into account your explosive skill damage is increased by 50% of your resistance piercing. So this used to be 100%. So this significantly nerfed the damage potential that we're able to reach with our eruption and our overheats. However, it is still the best option regardless of that, but this is one of the main reasons that the build is significantly nerfed, but it is still worth getting resistance piercing and stuff because, I mean, 50% extra damage, or 50% of our resistance piercing rather, is still a whole bunch of extra damage. Similarly, Convection got nerfed. Now it's only going to reduce all of our cooldowns by 2 seconds when it used to be 4 seconds. So a little bit unfortunate, but it's not all that big of a deal. And then Backdraft also got nerfed. I believe this used to be 30% AP for every skill on cooldown, so not really all that big of a deal. I mean, it's about a 10% loss because we want to use our eruptions after we use our Ash Blast and our overheat, ideally when it comes to bosses anyway. Our overheats shouldn't really have all that big of a deal, or a problem rather, one-shotting when mob clearing, so you don't really take too heavy advantage of Backdraft when you're ad clearing, but any loss of AP is still a nerf. But they kind of supplemented the loss of the AP with Backdraft with a buff to Trigger Sequence. Don't really know why they bothered nerfing Backdraft if they're just going to buff Trigger Sequence. I guess so you don't like spec into Backdraft and then ditch Trigger Sequence and spec coming in hot for the the Phaser Beam build or something. I don't know, they really don't like the Phaser Beam build apparently, even though Eruption is just way better, but whatever. So Trigger Sequence is now 35% per stack, and I think it used to be 25%. I could be wrong on that, it might have been 30. But regardless, Trigger Sequence is just going to increase your explosive damage, which pairs very nicely because basically our third Eruption is going to end up doing the majority of our damage. The third Eruption scales heavily off of this, so you overheat, slap out 2 eruptions, then your third eruption has the big 105% extra damage increase. So Trigger Sequence absolutely mandatory. If you are ad clearing and you want more ad clear ability, coming in hot is probably a little bit more damage and it'll probably enable your overheats. I mean, 15% more damage for your overheats is basically how I would look at it. So it's more of a consistent option when it comes to ad clear, but generally I would just keep on Trigger Sequence just so that your eruptions can do that big boy damage. Nothing has really changed ascension point wise. It's pretty standard stuff. Just go for anomaly damage, anomaly power, and then the next thing is up to you. You could go for elite damage if you want more boss killing potential, cooldown reduction if you just want faster cooldowns. Resistance piercing is probably actually better than both of those flat out just because you're scaling that into 5% more explosive damage. That's really good. And then armor piercing is still decent when you're using the armor mod Nerat, which did get nerfed, but it is still worth using, which we'll talk about later. Everything else besides that is just survivability or just anything that you feel like using, like magazine size, crit chance, crit damage, whatever. Nothing really matters all that much. Make sure that you prioritize the anomaly damage, anomaly power, resist pierce, and the cooldown reduction if you need it. When it comes to the weapons, not much has really changed here. The best weapon that you can use is still going to be a Mythos because it's going to roll with armor pierce, which when paired with Nerat is going to convert that armor piercing into resistance piercing, which then buffs our eruption. Like I mentioned earlier, and I'll talk about more when we get into the mod sections, no resistance against the fortified did get nerfed down from 100% to 65%, but that is still very good because we're just converting that into more resistance piercing. So this 30% is still a lot of extra damage for our eruption. For our other 2 mods, other than Omen is kind of useless when it comes to ad clearing, but it's good for bosses, just 10% extra damage against bosses pretty much, but it doesn't have 100% uptime. Whatever, we pretty much use the Mythos because Omen is a free mod, it has armor pierce, whatever. And then we want to get Fortress. Fortress got buffed from 20% to 25%, so that's going to give us a whole bunch of extra damage. And as you can see, I still have Mage's Rage on here. The Mage's Rage fix, which I am calling a nerf, doesn't matter if it is intended or not, it is still a nerf because your build does less damage as a result of it being fixed. Semantical argument tangent aside, Mage's Rage being nerfed or fixed or whatever is the main reason that our build is doing significantly less damage than it used to. Regardless of that though, it is still worth using I have not extensively tested this. From my very limited testing on Pyromancer, it seems that this is giving me about 500,000 anomaly power, which is still worth using as a tier 3 mod, but it is not mandatory as it used to be. So if you don't have Mage's Rage, I wouldn't stress too much about it. I would prioritize Fortress and Mage's Rage. Maybe Fortress has a little bit more priority now, but it's very difficult to tell. I haven't fully tested it, nor have I done the math. It's probably not all that big of a difference. Another option is Deathronome, but Deathronome is just simply worse than Mage's Rage, so I really wouldn't like prioritize it or anything else. If you feel like using something that is going to give you flat damage, feel free. When it comes to Ad Clear, I like to use this Roaring Umbra because it has Armor Pierce and Status Power, and the Status Power helps for just Ash lasting longer on the enemy, so it's a little helpful when Ad Clearing and Kinetic Stomp isn't completely dead, but it doesn't really matter. I would mainly focus on getting a Mythos, try to get Fortress or Mage's Rage, or even Deathronome on the bottom. Mage's Rage pretty significantly gutted, but it is still a decent amount of AP, and there's not all that much that's going to, help the damage of your Eruption. That's the main damage when it comes to this build. Getting like a, T3 Storm Whip or something isn't really going to help you that much, because ultimately you want your skills to do all the damage, right? You don't really care about dealing a little bit of extra damage with a mod. I don't have one on me, but the Firestorm mod is pretty good for applying burn and then taking advantage of that with Master Consumer, allowing your overheats to do extra damage, which we will talk about. Getting into the gear, so obviously you want to be using 3 pieces of Lava Lich. This is going to increase the damage of your Eruption and also decrease its cooldown. Pretty mandatory. Luckily for us, a lot of the Lava Lich stuff actually rolls pretty good, so it's fairly easy to set this build up. There's multiple different ways to set it up in terms of what mods you're running and also which pieces of Lava Lich you can use. When it comes to which pieces of Lava Lich you want to use the helmet, the chest, and then it's up to you between the legs or the gloves. Currently, I'm using the gloves instead of the legs because the Akari legs actually roll with Anomaly Echo, which is a really good mod, but it also has cooldown reduction. They nerfed the cooldown reduction cap on gear from 22.5%, I think it was, down to 16.5%, which makes reaching the global cooldown reduction cap of 55% a little difficult. However, if you are above the cap like I am, because of my Apocalypse tier, if you're like lower than Apocalypse tier 30, you won't reach 55% with just a few pieces. But for me, just 3 pieces with cooldown reduction is enough. But having the pants here as a safety net is nice regardless, and if you're lower APOC tier, it's good. Really up to you what you want to use. If you get the lower robe of the Lava Lich, it's not bad at all because, it rolls with fairly decent mods. I just think that Anomaly Echo is a little bit better than improved damage. It's definitely hard to tell though, and the lower robe of Lava Lich has status power, which is nice for ad clear. So really a toss up between those two. The gloves of the Lava Lich has really good mods as well, so it's pretty easy to just slap into the build. Let's get into all the mods then. So for the helmet, I have no resistance against a fortified, which again is going to convert our armor piercing into resistance piercing, which even after it's gotten nerfed is still very, very good because we're going to be using armor piercing on the gun and armor pierce in the pack tree. So that's 40% extra armor pierce, which then gets converted into 26% extra resistance piercing, which then results in 13% extra explosive damage, which is still very good for a singular mod, and that also is going to convert into 13% additional anomaly power. So it is definitely still worth the mod slot, just not nearly as good as it used to be. Then we have Magma Coat, which just rolls natively on the helmet, but it just increases the damage over time effect of our Eruption, which is very, very good for bossing. And then, of course, Death Sentence, the main reason that we're using Ash Blast, just gives us extra 30% anomaly damage, which is very good. For the chest piece, we have the chest of the Lava Lich with increased duration, so that our Eruption just does more damage over time, which is very, very good for bossing. Not all that great when it comes to mobbing, but definitely a great bossing option. And then I have Giga Blast, which is going to increase the radius of it. Again, more of a mobbing mod there, not really going to help us when it comes to bossing. You could make the argument that you could use, like, I don't know, a purple chest piece or something, specifically for bossing, and then use helmet, pants, and gloves of Lava Lich, but not all that big of a deal. Giga Blast is pretty much mandatory when it comes to mobbing because it's just going to make Eruption blow up the whole map, but I could see an argument for using a purple chest there instead. And then we have Captain Hunter on the bottom, 16% extra damage against elites, not much to say. Moving on to my pants, I have the Akari pants, which roll with Anomaly Echo, which is very good, just a flat 293k AP, pretty much all the time, very good. And then I have Phoenix Force on here. There's a few mods with this build that you can swap out depending upon if you are ad clearing or if you are bossing. This is what I believe to be the overall most versatile setup, but it's also what I like to use for ad clear. So this is ultimately what I would use if I were to just, do trials runs over and over again. Phoenix Force doesn't have all that much value when it comes to bosses because you're only going to stack it up a few times. Consuming statuses on bosses with overheat isn't going to happen all that much unless the boss lasts a really long time. But if you're ad clearing, you can get this stacked up 10 times, get that 500k AP almost immediately. So really, really good for ad clear. For bossing, you could very easily just swap this to like power simulation or something. And then I have Debris, which is going to do extra damage over time effect. Instead of Debris, you could actually get Cinders, which is a replacement for Master Consumer, which we'll talk about when we talk about Master Consumer. Then we have the Gloves, which rolls with Etna, which is pretty much mandatory because it's going to enable Eruption to apply burn on enemies, which is very, very good. Then we have Ash increased range, so that our Ash Blast just has additional range. Obviously, Ash Blast range is pretty useless when it comes to bossing, but it is pretty much the main reason that Ash Blast Overheat works in ad clear. Then we have Arms and Anomaly on the Gloves, which is just a flat, huge amount of additional anomaly power and is one of the better mods with the build. Then on the Then on the boots, we have Master Consumer, which is going to enable our overheat to consume either burn or ash to deal extra damage, but it's going to enable us to deal an extra 100% damage whenever we consume ash. So this works exactly the same way as Cinders, because we're not actually applying burn anyway, unless you're using like Firestorm. So if you were to get Cinders on the pants instead of Debris, you wouldn't have to use a Master Consumer because you're already getting the maximum amount of extra damage that you could be getting with overheat. So you could then just swap this to something that's going to give you more damage. Then I have Bullet Kindling, which is just 12% extra damage against enemies afflicted with burn, and then Unstoppable Force, of course, to increase our AP based on our resistance piercing. As you can see, currently I am only using 2 eruptions with this build. I do not have the mod Pompeii, which then gives you pretty much an extra eruption use. If I wanted to ad clear while using 3 eruptions, I would put on Phoenix Force. However, I find having 3 eruptions when ad clearing to be a little bit counterintuitive because I only need like 2 at most just to kill a couple elites, and then I like having that backdraft enabled with the extra AP when my skills are on cooldown for my overheat to do more damage. And the extra AP from Phoenix Force is very, very good. But if you wanted a 100% versatile setup that has 3 eruptions and is going to be very good, I would just swap out the Phoenix Force extra AP here for a 3rd eruption. And if you wanted maximum single target damage, you could swap out Master Consumer, swap out Ash Blast range, and then swap Phoenix Force to like Power Simulation, and then you could put on the 3rd eruption there, and then you could do something like improved damage for eruption or like Tainted Blood paired with Omen. So that's pretty much it when it comes to the gear. When it comes to actually playing with the build, first off I want to show you guys some ad clear, and then I'll show you guys some bossing. So there's not really all that much to say about how to play it. I mean, you kind of just walk in the room, press your Ash Blast and your overheat, kill stuff, and then anytime you see like a large clump of enemies or some elites that you want to kill, you press Eruption, and they'll pretty much just get one-shotted. So as you can see, I'm going in here, I'm just pressing Ash Blast, overheat, headshotting enemies to proc Arms and Anomaly and Mage's Rage, and then you just Ash Blast, overheat, spam your Eruption whenever you want, and that's pretty much it. It's probably one of the easier builds to use in the game. I probably don't really need to tell you guys all that much about how to use it, but I just wanted to give you guys some extra gameplay just to show how it is in general practice. But as you can see, pretty much just press Ash Blast, overheat. There's some guys that live with like a tiny amount of extra health, and if you were to have like Firestorm on your weapon or something, your overheat would enable you to pretty much one-shot everything. And if you're able to get a little bit of extra AP with the build, maybe some like purples or something, to get you a little bit of extra flat additional anomaly power, that would help with one-shotting those guys. But I mean, not really all that much to say. You just press the buttons and everything dies. Now I just want to show you guys the clip of me killing the final Arbiter in just 6 eruptions. So it's pretty simple. You roll in, headshot him to proc Arms and Anomaly and Mage's Rage, and then once he does this little cringe thing, you want to Ash Blast, immediately overheat so that the ash is not consumed by the overheat, because you don't really care about overheat doing any damage. You're literally just using it to proc stuff. You could just immediately overheat and then Ash Blast. Doesn't really make all that much of a difference. You just want to, if you're using Trial by Ashes or Ashen Boost or something, you want to be able to use eruptions while the boss is still ashed. So not consuming the ash with the overheat is somewhat important, but doesn't really matter. I'll land a few headshots and make sure my Omen gets on him just for the extra debuff. And then you just press Eruption, and then you kind of just sit here and wait for your Ash Blast and overheat to be available so that you can proc those and then proc Convection. As you can see, I proc those, proc Convection, and I got my Eruption back, and then the boss dies. Not really all that much else to say about it. You could do it potentially faster if you had like faster cooldown timings. Like if I put on Wildfire, I could probably kill him a little bit faster, but I mean, not all that big of a deal. I just like having the very consistent 6 eruption. As you can see, in the first 3 eruptions, I get him to less than half health. So even if he had significantly more health, you would still kill him in these 6 because you do extra damage when he's below 20%. As you can see, like, the eruption does a whole bunch of extra dot damage, and by the time I use my third eruption, he's basically already dead. But if you look at like the first, here, let's see the third eruption here. If you look at my third eruption that I ever cast, he still ticks down all the way from like the 70% mark down to like the 40% HP mark. So if he were to still live, I mean, my setup right here is very single target oriented, so it's a little overkill. So the 6 eruptions is fairly easy to obtain, and I could pretty easily see you slapping on Wildfire and still being able to do this much damage and potentially killing him a little bit faster. Anyway, that's pretty much it. Hopefully you guys learned something. If you did, please make sure to drop a like, subscribe for videos similar to this one, and thanks for watching. I'll see you guys later. Peace.